Welcome to Everyday Economics, a weekly podcast about the economics in daily life. I'm your host, Puja Mehra. Our farm policies are so bad that a bumper crop is no different from a drought for both depressed farm incomes. Bumper harvests produce gluts in the market that send prices of crops and therefore farm incomes crashing. Crop damage sends prices soaring, but since government policies usually have a pro-consumer bias, it intervenes to reduce market prices. In the latest such example, the central government has just banned the export of onions after wholesale prices showed a steady increase over the last few weeks. This is because of the damage to the market-ready crop from heavy rains in the month of August. Retail prices of onions have climbed. The rain damaged the crop in some neighboring countries as well, which led to an increase in demand for exports from those markets. The decision to ban onion exports is aimed at cooling domestic prices, which will naturally reduce farm incomes. The government has many economic tools for supposedly protecting farm incomes in such situations, such as the Farm Price Support Scheme, the Price Stabilization Fund, and Market Intervention Scheme, but rarely are such schemes employed to the best advantage of farmers. On the contrary, export and import policies often end up worsening the price situation for farmers. Although the minimum support prices are announced for more than 20 crops, noteworthy procurement is conducted for only 3 crops: paddy in wheat and sugarcane, for which procurement is done by the sugar mills, not by the government. Procurement frequently takes place at prices below MSPs. Small and vulnerable farmers usually do not get paid MSPs at all, as they sell their produce to aggregators, not directly in mandis. Gluts, depressed market prices, and mounting farmer losses are usually a direct consequence of malfunctioning in the agri pricing policies. Pricing policies distort market prices and send wrong signals to farmers on what to produce and how much to produce. The policy system is inept and it fails to correct the situations which then spiral out of control. MSPs are in fact highly misunderstood economic tools. The MSP is the price at which the government offers to procure from farmers their produce. Farmers and their supposed well-wishers keep pushing for MSP increases year after year. But if the problem is volatile or meager incomes, then the solution must target incomes, not prices, right? In an article in the Financial Express, Shweta Saini and former Agriculture Secretary Siraj Hussain have shown how, although by producing MSP crops and selling them in assured markets at assured prices, farmers think they are maximizing their gains and are safeguarding for future, but in reality they're actually losing out. Using extensive data, they show that farmers in Bihar, for example, generate more income per hectare than the farmers in Punjab. Punjab has a robust procurement system and Bihar has a relatively small and insignificant level of procurement operations. Kerala's farmers are even better off. This is because farmers in Punjab largely produce MSP crops, but Bihar generates higher value from pulses, oilseeds, fruits, and vegetables. Kerala has the smallest landholding size in the country, but it generates the highest per hectare incomes because it produces high-value crops such as spices and coconuts. My guest today is Dr. Radhika Pandey, an economist at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, the NIPFP. I asked her if she thinks that the 3 new agricultural legislations are anti-farmers or if the economic philosophy behind them is sound. If the farmers' fears on these 3 legislations and what impact that they might have on procurement and MSP are exaggerated, and if the real reasons for the political opposition to these reforms is something else. Hi Radhika, great to have you on the Everyday Economics podcast.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Let's start with the recent policy announcement placing a ban on onion exports. Could you explain if this is good or bad for farmers, and if it is good or bad for consumers? And does it also, as do most farm pricing policies, have a pro-urban consumers bias?
So the recent decision to ban onion exports is definitely, is adversely impacting the interest of farmers because, we need to understand the context behind it. There were rains in the month of August that spoiled the almost ready to go crops, onion crops, which were supposed to hit the market. It got spoiled. So there was, there was supply shortage, which resulted in an increase in price in the wholesale market as well as in the retail market. So Now, when the supply is limited, the only way farmers can, do some of the losses is by higher prices. And it was not only in the domestic market, but our traditional importers, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, they also suffered because of these August rains. So there was suddenly a surge in export demand, not only from our traditional importers of onion, but also from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. There was a spike. So farmers were willing to, export the supply of onions. But with the recent decision to abruptly ban the export of onions, it has adversely impacted their interests. Coming to the interest of consumers, yes, because onion is considered as a staple vegetable for Indian households. This move definitely helps in, calming their nerves, especially in the current context when consumers' income have been adversely impacted due to the COVID-19 induced lockdown. But what we need to understand is that this is not the correct way of protecting the interests of consumers. It is a very arbitrary and abrupt move to, introduce such bans and exports. And it's also against the spirit of what has been done over the last couple of months. So if we see, we can talk about in the, subsequently, but the spirit of the three ordinances and the three bills that are currently underway is to unshackle the farmers and allow them to sell their produce in domestic markets as well as on any platform. This goes against that spirit.
It's very important that you have linked this to the ordinances that were being debated and have been, I think, passed in Parliament without any
Yes.
voting, although some members asked for voting. And as you say, it's an example of how, on the one hand, the central government is trying to say that farmers must have as many as possible options of selling their produce, but at the same time, it itself is denying them one
Yes.
channel of selling their produce, which would have helped them recoup their losses
Yes.
because of loss of produce.
Yes.
And in the specific case of onions, I will, of course, talk to you about the ordinances and the bills, but in the specific case of onions,
Right.
there is this whole political economy that has developed
Right.
because of, I think, the consumption patterns and how onions, have ended up becoming a sort of a political hot potato.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And why does the government end up giving more prominence to the interests of urban consumers rather than farmers, especially when it comes to commodities like onions?
Yeah, so in previous experiences, also we have seen that onions have been responsible for many governments losing power, and in many, especially in Delhi and in other states also. It's the surge in onion prices that caused many governments to fall. Going back to 1980s also, when the first non-Congress government also fell due to spike in onion prices. So as you rightly pointed out, onion is a very sensitive crop. And if you look at the channel through which it affects, so when onion prices rise in the wholesale market, it will then rise in the retail market with a markup that will lead to an increase in CPI inflation, and that will then affect the interests of consumers. So in order to avoid all that, a repeat of the previous episodes, the government has taken this abrupt measure of banning exports. But what is also important to understand is that if we look at the consumption pattern over the last 4-5 years, especially coming from the National Sample Survey Organization data on consumer expenditure, we see that the proportion of consumer spending on food has declined, and within food also it has declined for vegetables, and it has increased for proteins, fruits, milk. There has been a perceptible shift in consumption pattern in favor of high protein rich diet as well as dairy products. So all these things need to be taken into cognizance when such abrupt measures are taken, because it's not just the interest of farmers and consumers, it also hurts the image of the country as a reliable exporter. So those are the various, trade-offs between the interests of farmers, the interests of consumers, our image in the international market. And more so, what needs to be done, while it is a very abrupt measure, what needs to be done is to address the supply side bottlenecks, because it's not a demand and supply issue. It's generally the markup over the wholesale prices that creates all these problems. So it's not that, farmers are gaining or consumers are losing. Oftentimes, it is the case that both of them are losing, and it's just the intermediaries who are gaining. So all those issues need to be addressed, which the government is trying to address through these three ordinances, rather than, taking this abrupt measure of banning exports.
Yeah, which is why it's so puzzling, no, that the very thing that you are saying you want to achieve is what you are in some way negating by this other step.
Absolutely.
And I think what that also tells us is that all good policies and all sound economics somehow always loses out when it comes to, just immediate political sensitivities.
Yes.
So that's sort of the long-standing problem, in our economy. So now to talk about the three, agri laws, the bills that were discussed in Parliament, and I think they've been passed now. What are these laws, and what do they seek to do?
Yeah, so there are three bills. One bill deals with the APMCs, that is the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committees. So it allows farmers to sell their produce outside the remit of APMCs. So currently what happens is that there are designated mandis, and farmers are supposed to bring their produce to these designated mandis and sell them to the licensed traders. Now, by way of this ordinance, farmers get the freedom, the option to sell outside the remit of these mandis. It's not that these mandis are being abandoned. Farmers have the choice to sell on the platform, on the mandi platform, or sell outside. So in a way, it is giving more competition. Potentially there could be more buyers, and that will help in boosting farmers' income. Because if you look at the context of the three ordinances, it is that the vision of the government is to double farmers' income by 2024. So all these three ordinances are considered as some kind of a medium channel to achieve the objective of boosting farmers' income. So that is the first ordinance.
So if I was to say that, let's say let's not take the example of farm produce, but let's say I produce watches, for instance, and there was some law that said that I can only sell the watches that I produce in a particular mandi. I cannot sell outside that. If I sell outside that, there may be a tax that the state government will charge on it, or the state government may have banned it completely. If a law from the center allows me to gives me the freedom to sell outside that mandi, then many buyers who could not have otherwise come to the mandi, I get access to those buyers also for whatever reason. So I can choose whether I want to continue to sell to the mandi or I want to sell to these new buyers. In this very simplistic example, it seems to me that the farmers are likely to be better off.
Yes. Yeah, because it's the concern amongst the farmers is that, maybe that the APMC platform is going away, it is being abandoned. It's not like that. It's just giving an option. It is facilitating farmers to sell outside the mandis, because what happens is that the traders have to pay license fee. So the price at which they are buying from the farmers may not be very remunerative to the farmers. So if they are able to sell outside the purview of these mandis, it may well be that they are able to sell at a higher prices. So right now the APMC market is more closer to a monopolistic market where the buyer wields the power. So farmers are allowed to sell outside the APMC framework, they will have the freedom to sell to buyers, and there will be a greater interplay of market forces of demand and supply, rather than being driven by that, okay, I have to pay license fee, I have to pay fee to the state government, so therefore I will try to recover some part from the farmers. So that kind of an arrangement will get diluted with this ordinance coming into force.
So what about the other two?
Yeah. The second one deals with contract farming. So it facilitates farmers to enter into contracts with traders. For example, consider if Reliance Fresh wants to, buy a certain kind of potato for making potato chips. So they will enter into a contract with farmers that, you should produce this variety of potato at, and therefore there the price is also locked, and the quantity to be sold to these sellers, these buyers, are also agreed upon. So again, it is kind of a mechanism to give remunerative prices to farmers, and also allowing them to sell outside the mandis and have a greater market for their produce, and giving them greater flexibility to enter into contracts with the other players in the market. And potentially it could lower the prices for consumers, because if the restaurant owners are buying directly from farmers, then their price will be reduced. They are buying directly from farmers, then their costs will be reduced. They can pass on the benefit of lower prices to consumers. So that is the second bill, which facilitates contract farming and assures a certain price to farmers based on the agreement reached between farmers and the traders. The third bill talks about, it's not a new bill. It proposes certain amendments to the Essential Commodities Act. So Essential Commodities Act was enforced at a time, or it was passed at a time when there were grave shortages in the economy. So central government could impose limits on how much a particular shopkeeper or an exporter is stocking. So that did not give an incentive to the farmers or to the various players in the market to develop warehousing facilities, or to engage in to encourage private investment in storage facilities and so on, because they did not have the incentive to store. They did not have the incentive to stock up food grains or fruits and vegetables, or for that matter, any agricultural commodity. Now, this kind of lever in the hands of the government to impose limits on stock has been considerably diluted with the amendments to Essential Commodities Act. Only under certain situations, only under certain conditions like war, or when inflation rises up above a certain threshold, that these stocking limits can be imposed. So it essentially frees the stocking and exporting from the draconian provisions of Essential Commodities Act. So the spirit of the three bills is to unshackle farmers and to engage in, and to help them fetch higher prices for their produce, and to enable, by amendments in the Essential Commodities Act, encourage greater investments in storage facilities.
So, everything that you have said about these three bills seems very logical and very pro farmers. How is it that farmers are protesting? How is it that the opposition is protesting, and many people who are practicing farmers are saying that these are anti-farmer bills? Do you see anything in the bills that could work to the detriment of farmers, or do you think that, as an economist, your analysis is that these are actually pro-farmer bills?
So, I mean, we think that they are pro-farmer bills, and in the medium to long run, they will benefit farmers. But what we need to see is that there are multiple stakeholders in this entire process. And there are different reasons why different stakeholders are opposing these bills. So why farmers are opposing, and that too, some sections of farmers, the farmers of certain states like Punjab and Haryana are opposing the bill. And we see that, farmers in Maharashtra and in other states are not so much opposing this bill. So the main reason is that, farmers, especially in Punjab and Haryana, which are, these states are heavily dependent on the procurement operations by central government and on the minimum support prices. They feel that this is an attempt to whittle away the procurement framework. It may well be that, they fear that going forward, there won't be any framework of minimum support prices or procurement by the central government. So that is the fear. But government has taken a number of steps, and on multiple occasions they have announced that it's not that the MSP or the procurement arrangement is going to be will not be in place. It will remain in place. It is just an additional mechanism to help farmers recover higher prices. So that's the concern of farmers. But on the
I
other hand,
just want to add here that,
yeah,
these fears seem exaggerated to me, because if you're going to have a PDS, which even
yes,
in current circumstances, because of the COVID crisis, the government has announced enhanced,
yes,
food
yes,
grain supply through the PDS channel to
right,
individuals.
yes, yes,
How are you going to do your PDS operations if you don't have procurement and if you don't have
absolutely,
MSPs? And how will you
absolutely,
have your buffer stocks to ensure food security if you
yeah,
don't do procurement? So,
right.
uh, it does seem to me that, farmers and, other stakeholders in these two states, especially, but even if there are any outside of them, then their
Yeah.
fears do seem exaggerated.
Yeah, and especially I think yesterday or day before, the central government has already announced a hike in MSP for wheat and rabi crops to placate their fears. So it seems that their fears are exaggerated.
In
It's
fact, I just want to also, sorry to interrupt you. I also want to say here that, if you could just at this point explain what MSP is, because most people don't understand the economic tool that MSP is. They think it is just the price at which, procurement takes place, and it has to only increase every year. They don't understand that it is a mechanism to influence the market price.
yes. So whenever there's an excess supply of food grains due to bumper crop, central government announces a minimum support prices, which helps in guiding or signaling it sets a floor that the price cannot fall below this price. So because government is a major player, it is buying huge chunks of food grains or whichever crop they are in, if for which they are providing minimum support price. So it helps in signaling that to the market that here is a major player who is buying at this price. So it sets a floor that below this the price is not going to fall. So that is what the minimum support price is, because
Is
generally we,
supposed to
yeah,
do, though generally price does fall below MSP,
yes,
because not much procurement takes place. It is done for few crops. It is done in few states.
yes,
So MSP does not really function. What I'm trying to say is MSP even now does not function, as well as farmers would like it to. Their whole faith in MSP is a little difficult for me to understand when there are
yeah,
better
yeah, there are,
options.
yeah, there are better options. The better option is, providing direct income support. MSP
Exactly.
is very inefficient because MSP distorts the,
Pricing
incentives of
signal.
farmers. It distorts pricing signals. It distorts incentives of farmers because we provide higher MSP for wheat and rice and not for other crops. So, even if there is a demand by consumers for some other commodities, farmers are incentivized to produce only those commodities for which there is a minimum support in the form of minimum support prices.
In fact,
So
it is affecting the nutrition.
it is affecting the nutrition level because there is a complete disconnect between what the consumers want, as indicated by the NSSO survey, and what is being produced. So ultimately, then what it leads to is that our food grains, we have buffer stock, our PDS granaries are just stocked up, and then ultimately there is wastage, and then we will have to export at throwaway prices. So it distorts the entire market mechanism. Essentially, it was introduced for this purpose, but as you rightly say, it was introduced for the purpose of setting a floor, especially during to provide some kind of a price support. But it is not playing its role, and it has long term ramifications because it is a complete disconnect between what is being produced and what is being sought to be consumed.
What should ideally be consumed? We need more proteins,
We
not
need,
more
yeah,
carbohydrates.
yeah, we need
And
more
if you
protein,
keep
yeah.
increasing MSP year after year, naturally farmers will keep increasing their production year after year. But do you need that much
Absolutely.
food grain? You don't
Yeah.
need that much food grain.
Yeah, so
Right,
that is what
sorry.
is
Yeah.
happening. Yeah, that's what is happening. And then there is wastage. We come across so many CSEP reports every year that this much amount of food grain is being wasted, and then we will have to, sell in the international market at throwaway prices. So those
And
are all the.
farmers could just, ideally they could have, if this MSP system was more fine-tuned and, if it was not as poorly managed as it is right now, farmers could have diversified into much more profitable crops, maybe
Absolutely.
horticulture or, something
Yes,
else.
cash crops, so many other avenues. But because the system is such that there is higher MSP for only wheat and rice, so this distorts the entire production consumption machinery.
Right. So, is there any argument against these bills? Are any
Yeah, yeah,
stakeholders
okay.
going to get affected
Yeah,
adversely?
yeah, sorry. Yeah, so on the farmer side, we discussed that farmers are their fears are exaggerated because it's not that the MSP framework is going to be whittled down anytime soon. But on the other side, there are the state governments are protesting because for state governments, one of the major source of revenue will dry down if if there are less transactions in APMC mandis, especially for Punjab and Haryana. So according to some estimates, Punjab annual tax revenue from mandi fee and from the rural RDF, which is called the Rural Infrastructure Development Fee, is somewhere ranging between 3,000 to 3,500 crore. So the state governments will suffer if there are lesser transactions happening, or sooner or later, if the APMCs become redundant, their major source of revenue will die down. Primarily because what the ordinances say is that if farmers are selling outside the remit of APMCs, then they don't have to pay, neither the buyer nor the seller has to pay any taxes. So this tax system, this tax machinery emerges only in the APMC framework. And once they move outside the APMC framework, the tax system, the tax revenue by state governments, especially Punjab and Haryana, will suffer a lot. So that is why state governments, especially Punjab and Haryana, are very much against this bill. Also, the middlemen are opposing because they used to gain a lot by buying from farmers at low prices and then selling to the retailers at high prices. So the markup that they were earning, that will be reduced. So it's not really the farmers who are protesting. Maybe a section of farmers, yes, because of their fears, but the concerns emerge mainly from the state governments and the other players whose revenues or whose incomes would be affected if this system gains traction.
There's also a huge amount of fear that this will lead to Contract Act will lead to corporatization of farming, and small farmers will be at the mercy of capitalists and large corporate houses, and that's not going to be good. They will get exploited. Are those fears also exaggerated?
I think so that they are exaggerated because it's not that they are being forced to enter into such agreement. If farmers feel that they can be, it's something which is pro their interest, they can enter into these agreements. And then there is price assurance, there are dispute resolution mechanism. So I think sooner or later we have to move away from this state-sponsored machinery of APMC and move towards market interplay, operation of markets. And maybe there are some frictions, but I think those need to be addressed. Those are short-term costs, which should be addressed rather than completely doing away with this entire, contract farming argument. Because in the long run, it will benefit not only farmers but also, various stakeholders, including consumers.
And all these issues and these three bills that we are discussing, one of the arguments being made is that they were rushed through because they were passed in Parliament in just about 3 days and no discussion took place. But are these issues and these kind of legislations and proposals not in the policy circles being debated
for many years, many committees have suggested exactly
Yes.
this. In fact, I think the
Yes.
previous Congress government itself was going to bring similar laws, and it
Yeah.
could not because it did not have the numbers in parliament. So, is
Yes.
that part of the criticism also not very accurate?
That's true. It's the discourse around the APMC framework has been there for a long. It's been there for since Congress government was also in power, and many agricultural economists have written about the demerits of this framework. They have estimated the loss to farmers and the markup which is gained by the middlemen, and how it is detrimental to interests of both farmers as well as consumers. So the discourse has been in place for quite some time. Central governments have tried to persuade states to come on board on these policies, and some of the states have already on their own volition allowed farmers to go outside the APMC framework in states like Maharashtra and southern states. There are farmers are allowed to sell outside APMC. The only thing was the implementation is not uniform across states, but some states have already taken initiatives in those directions, and therefore those states are not really opposing these ordinances because it is in that direction. We also have the Model APMC Act, which was enacted by central government, and it was circulated to state government that they should use this as a kind of a baseline for bringing in agri reform. So it has been in the works for quite some time, and it's not that this allegation that it has come as a shocker and it was not discussed. I don't think that they are well founded.
Yeah, I thought probably, there was scope for it to be handled better on the floor of the
Yeah, that's
House,
true.
and they
Yeah,
probably
that's
should
true.
have allowed for voting since that's what the law is in Parliament.
Yes.
But to say that the proposals themselves have just landed out of nowhere
Yeah, from
probably is
nowhere. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
To now talk about, terms of trade, which is something that, we've heard Dr. Manmohan Singh talk about, for many, many decades. We've heard many agricultural economists such as Professor Ashok Gulati talk about. The latest, in fact, is RBI governor, who's just very recently, Mr. Shaktikanta Das, has said that, there is a need to shift the terms of trade in favor of agriculture. What is, favorable terms of trade for agriculture? What does it mean, and what needs to be done to make sure that that happens?
Favorable. So generally, what does the terms of trade means? It is nothing but the ratio of export prices to import prices. It is a mechanism, or you can say it is an indicator to assess our position in the international market, how much influence we wield in the international market. That is what terms of trade is all about. And recently, the reference was made by RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das in his recent BIS speech, where he was just underlining the next generation of reforms in the field of agriculture. So after discussing these three ordinances, he mainly pointed out that now is the time to capitalize on the benefits of these ordinances, and the next step to do is to allow more exports and to exploit the agricultural terms of trade. That essentially means that if there is scope for higher demand in international market, we should allow free exports. We should allow farmers to reap the benefits of higher prices in the international market, because it is essentially on account of higher prices that we can think about farmers' income being boosted and agricultural gross value added to rise. Because beyond a level, even if you improve your productivity, beyond a level, increase in productivity would lead to increase in supply, and if there is not much demand, it will lead to depressed prices. So the only scope for improving farmers' income beyond a point is to enable them reap the benefits of higher prices if there are so in the international market. So that is what he is referring to, and he actually makes a case for dynamically shifting terms of trade in favor of agriculture, essentially meaning allowing agricultural exports to prosper and not imposing limits on exports of agriculture. because that's the only way to ensure sustainable increase in agricultural gross value added.
It seems very unfair, no, that although our politicians speak so much, at times of election campaigns for farmers, and we would think that, this is a country where farmers are very important, but most policies, especially policies that impact agriculture pricing, are actually anti-farmer, and they prevent the farmer from getting higher prices for
Absolutely.
their produce. And if they don't get higher prices, how are they going to get higher incomes? They'll always remain
Absolutely.
poor.
Yes,
So, there's just so much, there's so much sort of
paradox in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Radhika, thank you so much for explaining all these issues around the three bills that are in the news right now, and some of the other agricultural issues around them. Thank you for bringing out all the, how the various stakes are stacked up against each other, and how everybody's saying something but doing completely something else, including the central government, which is talking about giving freedom to farmers, but itself banning exports of onion. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Puja. It was a wonderful discussion.